All right. What's going on, y'all? Hope everybody is well. Let's see. As we get it going today on June 16th, hope everybody is having a good week. Heading into Juneteenth. Let's see. Got a few people coming in. Give people some time to come through. But it has been a good week. Been getting things in order. Feeling healthy and strong, and I hope that you are as well. Let's see here. Okay, looks like everything is going. What's good, Abdullah? Hope everybody is well. Welcome to the Onyx Report, right? Um, Featuring myself, as it were. Let's see. All right, there we go. What's up, Mark? All right, preemptive happy birthday to you. Welcome to the Onyx Report, though, where Black male justice advocates uplift Black men and boys using critical analysis. Today, we're going to have an interesting discussion where we look at what that looks like in an era where Africana Studies, my chosen field, is in play. What happens with Black males, what they grapple with. So we'll get into that in a moment. But I want to give people time to come through. So it looks like it's kind of a slow moving day. We are broadcasting today on innerlightradio.com as well as Facebook and YouTube, of course. So you can catch us on any of those. And as usual, my weekly shows will be posted to iTunes as a podcast. So you can look up the Onyx Report with Dr. T. Hasan Johnson there. And you can listen to past podcasts. I don't put on my daily show, but you will find my weekly shows on iTunes. Other than that, you can come to my YouTube page and check out the daily shows where I cover a wide variety of topics. That is the Black masculinist news for the day. So you can check that out. Usually I try to do that at noon Pacific, and it's usually a fairly short kind of hit. What's up, Ron? So you can check into those. Hopefully that will be something you're interested in. Today's subject, though, is a little close to my heart, and it has a lot to do with, my chosen field, as I said, and something I've invested nearly 30 years into. So we'll get into that. What's up, Kwaku? Hope everyone's good. You can also, support the show by donating. You can like, share, subscribe, join, and donate. So please consider doing so. You can see on the screen the Patreon, the Cash App, the PayPal, and the Venmo. I will also put some information into the comment section so you know how you can go about supporting the show directly. And that will hopefully be something that you will consider doing. You can also go to YouTube, and right below, put it on the screen so you can see it there for those of you who are watching. Brother Malika, appreciate that support, man. I hope you're well. So you can become a member. Click the join button right next to the subscribe button right there on YouTube below the video. And from there are different levels of membership. You can choose the perks that relate to each one. You can decide from there. You can also go to Patreon, where you can support the show that way with a monthly donation, or you can also support the Institute for Black Male Studies through Patreon as well. So all you need to do for that is go to patreon.com/thjohnson, and you can support either the Onyx Report or the Institute for Black Male Studies, right? Mr. Donnie Mack, what's going on? Good to see you. All right. See, we are getting it in. Folks are filtering in slowly but surely. And I know this one is... Appreciate that support, Sam. I know this subject it doesn't seem to lend itself to what's going on in the public, but bear with me. There is a connection. You don't necessarily have to be in college or in Africana Studies to appreciate what's going on and what I'm about to say. Nevertheless, it is something that I have to kind of put on the table, especially in light of some of the recent conversations I've had. All right. We're not going to do the sacred today. I thought that was screened out, but we do have a couple of public service announcements that I thought would be of interest, right? Okay, Lee says he didn't get a notification today for the first time. What's up, Damon? Yeah, I'm not sure what's going on. I think I've been shadow banned again as far as that. So, that would explain quite a bit right now. Usually the numbers are a little higher, but I think YouTube has been a little unhappy with some of my subject matter. Nevertheless, we're going to get to what we do, and people will come through as they come through. What's going on, Barry? All right. So, public service announcement number 1. Yes. Just received a notification today on okplayer.com. Actually, it was dated 2 days ago, and it is entitled Atlanta's Freaknik announces a 2021 return and lineup: Adina Howard, Project Pat, Paul Wall, and more. This year's Freaknik will be hosted at Morris Brown College from October 8th through 10th. It says Freaknik is set to return this fall in Atlanta, and it'll be a 3-day long celebration. Right. Years ago, it was wildly popular unofficial Black spring break that was known for debauchery and chaos, as to say the least. I mean, honestly speaking, it's probably, if I had had a chance to go in high school the way I wanted to, I probably wouldn't be here right now as your good professor. I wanted to go to Morehouse, but honestly, it wasn't for Morehouse. I wanted to go to Freaknik, and I couldn't afford to. So luckily I didn't, because I don't think I would have graduated. Honestly, I really don't think I would have graduated. Nevertheless, it says originally launched in 1983, historically Black college and university students traveled in large numbers to partake. Appreciate that, Xavier Brothers. Thank you. All right. Chief Rocka, thanks for coming through with the support. So it says university students traveled in large numbers to partake in Freaknik. At its peak, it attracted 250,000 attendees. Also, it wasn't abnormal to see vulgar acts taking place in the streets of Atlanta in broad daylight. In '99, due to violations and complaints, the last official Freaknik was held in Atlanta. 2 years back, it returned as a family-friendly all-day festival and concert. You have a family-friendly Freaknik, huh? Okay. Documentation of Freaknik is what has kept the spirit of celebration alive. Oral stories and photos of its heyday are always floating around. If you do a quick search on Tumblr, you'll find an assortment of videos and images that speak to the fashion and energy of Freaknik in the 90s. The 2021 version will be hosted at Morris Brown College, as I said. It will feature headliners Adina Howard, Project Pack, Lil Scrappy, Ray J, Pastor Troy, JT Money, Paul Wall, 95 South, DJ Unk, Field Mob, and 8 Ball and MJG. So y'all can do what you will with it. It is what it is. Let me see. What's up, BGS in the house? I can't give him one right at the moment. I got to open that up because I don't have it open on YouTube. BGS, I haven't done that in a while, so you're going to have to remind me how to do it. Anyway, so yeah, Freaknik is back. So y'all check it out at your whim. Before I go further, I do want to honor my supporters and subscribers. So let me go ahead and do that real quick. Shout out to them. Check this out. All right. So appreciate all the supporters out there, subscribers. Please make sure you join. And I'm not sure if YouTube is bouncing people. I've been getting notifications that some people have been unsubscribed automatically, So, if that's the case, look out for your brother and join back in. What's up, Dr. Thunder? Good to see you. I think Derek Holmes has a very important point. He says it would be, he's talking about Freaknik. It would be a Me Too honeypot these days. And you got a point. Freaknik, I don't know if it can exist post Me Too. I think men have responded to Me Too with a very serious and consistent stepping back in a particular way, which on one level, some people applaud. On another level, it's affecting mating, dating, and definitely marriage. So you have people all over the spectrum in terms of how they feel about that. But, so we'll see if Freaknik can really exist in the time period we live in at this moment. All right. Now, so there we go. Back to that. Now, I also wanted to acknowledge that we have Father's Day coming up. And I basically wanted to start that with one of my favorite skits that I mainly make it a point to listen to every year around Father's Day. And I think it's one that I hope you guys will enjoy as well. So we will see if my system will comply with me here and play you a little piece of brother Ali Siddiq. If you're not familiar with Ali Siddiq, a comedian, I find him to be hilarious, but he did an epic piece on Father's Day. So let's see if my system will comply and you guys can hear it. Let me get this up, and I'll turn this up here.
Let me say this. I've been thinking about this too. Father's Day is the worst holiday in the world. I've done the research. I already know. Let me tell you something. Mother's Day is the second most celebrated holiday in the world. Christmas is first. So that means it's Jesus, then your mama. You know what Father's Day fall at? Number 20. I can't think of 18 other holidays.
Let me know if you guys can hear that.
Do you realize
one in the chat?
Halloween is number 6? Does that mean ghosts and goblins go before fathers? Arbor Day is number 13. I don't even know what that is. I just know it come before me. That's crazy. Columbus Day is number 16. Celebrating Columbus Day is like celebrating somebody finding money in your house. Where you get that $50 from? I discovered it in your kitchen. Ridiculous. Fathers, and it's mother's fault. It's mother's fault. Because see, when Mother's Day come around, fathers go in their pocket deep. Hey, I want to get my mama something. You cash that money out. You know what mothers do? Hey, I want to get daddy something. Well, go in that car. It's some change in my little cup holder in there. Don't nobody even have a sale for Father's Day. Who has a Father's Day sale? Mother's Day sale is like 30 of them. Everybody have Mother's Day sale. Don't nobody have no Father's Day sale. Who has Father's Day sale? The dollar store. That's how you get water hose and jumper cables for fathers. And the stores know this because now the store got a little trick for fathers. They make little packages where a little box give you suspenders, socks, and a shirt. One box. And you know what kids do? They give you that stuff throughout the year. They give you that shirt for Father's Day, them socks for your birthday, and then they just randomly give you something else as they think about it. It's crazy. Father's Day sucks. And I'm a father. I did all this work to be a father for it to suck.
That's real talk. So that tends to be what Father's Day is for a lot of brothers. I do hope you guys can have a better one than that, for the most part. And that comes out of a culture of not only appreciating, not appreciating fathers, but not appreciating Black men for the most part. I think we've developed a culture, particularly in the last 60 odd years, where the importance and value of Black men is greatly diminished in the eyes of the family. So I think Father's Day is kind of a barometer for that in that respect. But there's something else in relation to Father's Day I wanted to kind of push forward as well. And that is that, I did a show with Brother BGS and attorney Dennis Sperling. And at one point, actually, I think it was the one before that. It might have been with BGS and Gigi. But either way, it was a point where we started to talk about the absence of acknowledgement when it comes to fathers, grandfathers in particular, who sacrificed for decades to not even be remembered today, to be the backdrop in the story of, say, Big Mama. You know what I mean? And I had a lot of men come forward and tell me how many, how many of them didn't know their grandfathers' names, didn't know anything about their grandfathers? How many of them had grandfathers who were alive, but, stayed out of the house, just working, crazy hours, just, because that was the only place that they felt at home. You know what I mean? So I want to urge you this Father's Day to actually, if you're in a situation to, obviously, if you're adopted, you're not able to, it is what it is. But I'm saying, if you're in a position to actually find out more about your fathers, your grandfathers, your great grandfathers, your uncles, find out, make an effort this year to honor them by actually finding out more about them. Right? Most particularly, so when you have kids, if you don't already, you can actually pass down their memory as part of the family lineage as well. Do not contribute to the invisibility of the Black men in your family line, right? And don't let the mistakes that they've made as human beings, let's not act like Black men are the only ones that make mistakes, right? Let's not make the mistakes allow them to remain invisible or monsters in people's memory. Actually find the human being in your bloodline and speak to that. Remember that, because in too many instances, it seems that that's been forgotten. So that's one of the things. Research the men in your family who've gone invisible, who were little more than a paycheck or a story or two, or worse yet, a horrible memory as it's been told to you, especially, right? So keep that in mind. The other thing I wanted to urge people to do, because my generation was really the generation that experienced single parenthood, on a widespread basis first, the Gen X. And what I want to urge people to do, particularly brothers, is to actually, if you don't, and if you haven't done this already, regardless of what your relationship is, at some point, make an effort to find out your father's side of the story. And of course, that's especially if you've never bothered to do it. If you've only found out about your father's history, if he wasn't raised with you in the home, hell, even if he was, sit down and talk to him about, what the family story, especially your life, your birth. Find out what that story is from your father's perspective. It doesn't have to be, difficult. It doesn't have to be oppositional and argument. It doesn't have to be intense. Just find out. One of the things I find is the older I get, the more I talk to family members, the more the story changes. And I don't mean to suggest that people are being dishonest. You just find that people just drop different things that they haven't before. And I have been surprised from time to time. And they'd be like, I'm like, how the hell have I never heard that? And they'd be like, oh, we didn't tell you that? Oh, my bad. Go. Sit down with your fathers. I don't care if you hate his guts, if you love him, just sit down and listen to the other side of the story. Find out about your own family origins in a manner that no one else can tell. And I'm not saying that makes, Black men perfect. It's not about that. It's just finding out your story, your family story from a different vantage point. And that's, of course, if you haven't already. But I would say, even if you have, sometimes, again, having these conversations, you get bits and pieces, you get nuggets that you didn't get before. Now, as it's been stated, right, history is always written by the winners. When two cultures clash, the loser is obliterated and the winner writes the history books, right? So as Napoleon once says, what is history but a fable agreed upon? Well, what happens when the narrative of your life's history is only told by one parent? You get things from one perspective. So, if you're able, check that out. See what else you might learn. Might be useful to you. And if you can, even if it's only, even for your own, psychological well-being, you might be in a position, or you might be in a situation where you have to forgive and let certain things go for your own well-being. Consider doing that. But take Father's Day this year and take it a bit further than the superficial kind of treatment it generally gets, right? We don't usually get dinners and meals and extravagant gifts. I mean, you get a tie, there's some socks or something of that nature. It's usually very downplayed, which is why I play Siddiq, because he's right. But I want Black men in particular to take the extra step this Father's Day to actually do something more than just superficially, observe the holiday, right? All right. So that's real quick. Now, I'm not going to do a full review. This is another public service announcement, right? This is I caught the last half hour of this last night, and it prompted me to want to say something very briefly on something I witnessed in this. Now, for those of you who are not familiar, this is Tyler Perry's The Family That Prays. Perry is in this film as himself, not as looking like himself, except for that jacked up afro. And he's not Medea in this particular one. But one of the things I found useful is, or interesting, I should say, is watching the end of the film. So I caught it just before Sanaa Lathan was slapped over a counter, which is always an interesting experience. And it was interesting to watch it this time, because I knew it was coming. And so when it happened, I saw the women all rush to the brother. You can see, pictured on the bottom right next to Alfre Woodard. So as he slaps his wife, Alfre and her sister in the film run over, to grab him, right? And even though they sat there and listened to this woman talk to him like a dog, their priority, of course, was still to prioritize her. And so it was interesting just to that moment. But that's not the point, the part I'm really emphasizing. One of the things I noticed at the end of this film was how you saw this coming together of women across race, across class, across legacy, that came together as women, successful women, right? You got CEOs, you got COOs, you got deep family money, you got racial tensions all put aside in the name of this kind of transracial feminism, right? The women coming together, and the men, by and large, especially the black men, they only advance in any degree because the husband steals money from his wife, and does so very passive aggressively. He doesn't even talk to her. He just does it behind her back, so to speak, which I found to be extremely weak. Now, obviously, I'm not doing a deep dive in this film, but I am saying I just observe this kind of feminist moment at the end of the film where women come together and triumph over the patriarchy, right? And it reminded me of a series that we went into last year, which was a little more blatant about the same point. In this instance, you saw Black, white, Asian women all coming together, and even a gay dude, to represent the new, era, right? The new era of who serves as the moral barometer of the world, who holds justice, in their very their DNA, and who should be spoken for, or who should be doing the speaking, I should say. So this is very interesting. It was the same kind of thing, but it's built on that kind of narrative that we see in Tyler Perry's film, and takes it to a more extreme degree. Even if one of the black women in the film actually becomes, or the series becomes, a white woman at different points. All of those things aside, and of course the zaddy worship, none of that matters. I posted on Facebook a little earlier yesterday about a show called In Treatment, where you got to see, a black woman therapist, engage in what we might call zaddy worship in that context. But it's interesting to see this kind of new transracial, right, transsexual feminism on display. And one of the hallmarks to this feminism is the elimination of black males, right? Malehood to some extent in general, but most particularly the invisibility of heterosexual black males, and how that seems to be acceptable. Now, that's going to play a theme in tonight's discussion, or at least my talk, I should say, because I'm seeing it kind of well structured in the academy. Very similar idea. So if you haven't had a chance to check out Tyler Perry's The Family That Prays, or Lovecraft Country, do so at your at your leisure. You don't necessarily have to rush, but if you're interested in seeing how these ideas are being represented, and especially how they're being kind of given out to society, and especially the next generation, it might be something you want to keep up with, just to make sure you're not caught off guard by some of the things we hear. 141 people watching across Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch, and more on innerlight.com. Please make sure you support the show. Again, like, share, subscribe, join, and donate. Make sure you do that so we can continue to broadcast and give you what you need. I might be doing another mobile daily show tomorrow, as as my son and I head out of town. I might give you guys another one of those. Hopefully, you guys will enjoy it while we're getting on the road. All right. Okay. Let's see here. There we go. Remember, before we jump in, to support the Institute for Black Male Studies, you can go to instituteforblackmalestudies.com. You can do everything from take courses to taking workshops to also watching a series of free interviews with high-profile Black males. So you can enjoy that. You can also purchase merchandise if you click on the merchandise link in the menu, and you'll see everything there and more than you expect. Scroll down to the very bottom of the page and wait for it to load, and you can click next page, and there are several, I think it's like 6 or 7 pages of merchandise. So please make sure you check that out and support the show. Appreciate the Cash App expansion wiring. Thank you very much. Okay. All right. Let's get into it. Africana Studies. All roads lead to the Black Gynocracy. What the hell am I talking about? Okay. I had a chance to have a conversation the other night with a colleague of mine, and we were talking about, our experiences in the field. Now, just so I can put some context to this, so I've been teaching now for about 23 years in Africana Studies. I have 3 degrees in my field, one at the undergraduate level, one at the master's level, and a doctorate in cultural studies with a certificate in Africana. Right? So you're talking about 1992 to 2008 was, my training era. And so that being said, I came into Africana Studies under the tutelage and direction of the late Dr. William Little. Shout out to him. Peace be upon him. I hope his family is doing well. He was a hell of a mentor. He was also a past president of the National Council for Black Studies. His presence meant a lot to me. He was the first teacher I ever had that actually saw my potential. Even though I got A's and B's since kindergarten, really, I never actually had a teacher give a damn. And he was actually the first Black male teacher I'd ever had. And this was my junior year of undergrad. So he kind of, saw me and saw the work I was doing on campus. I had founded the Pan-African Union on the campus and whatnot. And he kind of pulled me aside, and next thing I knew, he was really, pushing for me. So I will, always honor him for doing that. I didn't know I had potential to do anything. And it was actually him having faith in me that had a lot to do with where I got to, especially in terms of graduate school. So shout out to him. But if you're not familiar, Africana Studies evolved out of Black Studies. The first formal department was at San Francisco State, 1968, under Dr. Nathan Hare, who is still alive and is on Facebook, as a matter of fact. So you can shout him out, whatnot, if you've never met him or never heard anything about him. His work with he and his wife have done, Nathan and Julia Hare, is phenomenal. So you can check that out. But anyway, Africana Studies evolves out of Black Studies, and from Black Studies, you have a variety of different fields: African American Studies, Pan-African Studies. There's all kinds of different variations of the field. Matter of fact, when I got to Fresno State, it was Africana and American Indian Studies. Go get that. There's all kinds of variations that come out of that. Some more political, some less political than others. Right? Pan-African Studies was very much in your face, very much a political endeavor, whereas Africana was a lot more subdued in a particular way, but sought to kind of focus on an attempt to bring together the diaspora and continental African cultures and have some analyses under that rubric. Right? So that was kind of the framework for Africana Studies. Can we actually, perform research that connected the African world, right? The diaspora and the continent, and really pull those, kind of lines together, and I came through that at Cal State Dominguez Hills under Dr. Little as far as that. And then I went to Temple University and did my master's in African American Studies, where I was more formally introduced to the African-centered theory that under a number of different scholars there, but Molefi Asante primarily. And, there you kind of had this, introduction to the one world African culture, African culture as a superstructure that connected all Black African people around the world, this kind of idea. And of course, Afrocentricity, right? Seeing the world from an African standpoint. And you had this kind of viewpoint of the world through an African lens, which was the central idea. Now, at that time, this was about 96 to 97. I was at Temple. And then you saw this early shift to gender, or at least that was my that was my formal introduction to it. I didn't realize I'd been introduced to it a little earlier, even in undergrad. I mean, at that point, you could take a course about, literature, about whatever, English, and, and then it would be kind of converted in a way to a Black feminist course. I didn't really know that at the time. I just thought that's what it was. But that was my first real introduction to it. By the time I got to Temple, people were taking courses in the women's studies department, like Sonia Sanchez would be teaching in women's studies, and you came into Africana studies, and if you were interested in gender, you would go to women's studies and take a course. As with many other places, gender studies was synonymous with women's studies. I would even go so far as to say that there wasn't even as strong of a queer studies, approach to things as there would be later. But one of the things I did notice is that heterosexual men didn't have a gender to speak of, right? One of the arguments being used was that because Black studies was so sexist, that, you needed women and gender studies to focus on women and girls because they had been ignored. I wouldn't say that there was a serious investment in Black males as a gender, but that was, that was kind of the argument being made. So, here I started to see this split happening doing my master's degree at Temple. And, it was what it was. And at that time, if you took a gender studies class as a man, you could pretty much expect to, it was almost like being treated like a white dude coming into Africana studies. I mean, there was an intense kind of split, that kind of thing. And a lot of guys would do it to try and demonstrate how progressive they were, and sometimes discussions behind the or under the table, some of it had to really do with trying to get women, whatever. I'm not going to say that was the case for all men. I saw both. I saw men who were just curious about the subject matter, and I saw men who were explicitly there trying to get numbers. It is what it is. But that's when I began to see the split. And by the time I got to Claremont Graduate University in 2000 to do my doctorate, I saw it on a whole nother level, right? Where in that regard, feminism, really Black feminism in particular, took a whole new turn, at least as far as my experience was concerned. And I started to see what I began to see much later in a lot of different areas, whether you're talking about religion. I've talked about this before in regard to Christianity or Ifa. I talked about this in regard to education, even K through 12, this hyper emphasis on girls. So in terms of, Christianity, we're talking about really the linkage between prosperity gospel and feminism and the ways in which that changed the narrative of how the church even presented what Christianity was. And this in many ways led to many Black men leaving the church. In terms of Ifa, I talk about this in regard to these kinds of, as one brother put it, these kind of Wiccan sects that have popped up, and they emphasize the Orishas, but only the female ones, right? And you're seeing this in media as well. I talked about this in terms of the show American Gods. You're starting to see this culture of, just this hyper priority on women and girls, and the invisibility of even the masculine principle, not just boys and men, right? In education, we can talk about this in terms of the hyper focus on girls, especially K through 12, right? Where we see, one of my daily shows, I showed that even though Black males are getting GEDs in pretty strong numbers, they're not necessarily graduating high school, especially in a way that, propels them into college. That's still the purview of Black women as it pertains to the Black community. And you have an overwhelming number of female teachers, and the emphasis, or the impact of that, I should say, on female students is something that is under emphasized on. People don't talk about it enough, but I think it has a profound impact on student confidence, grade performance, and graduation. Nevertheless, this is the purview of girls, and boys become hyper invisible, Black boys in particular, especially when you talk about those who are sent to special ed, right? Those who are expelled more often, suspended more often than anybody, almost double the numbers of Black girls, right? And it's absolutely ridiculous, and it's somehow acceptable, right? You got boys who by the 8th grade, are only 10% of which who are, able to read at grade level. Science and math, is about 12%. So the numbers are extremely low and we tolerate it. So there's a hyper emphasis on girls and a complete, obliviousness about boys in the K through 12 level. And that, of course, has a direct impact on college, undergrad and graduate, right? So we see an absence there. If we're going to talk about private or appreciate that support, D Remedy. We're going to talk about private or corporate investment. We've seen this in the last year, especially whether you're talking about Goldman Sachs, Visa, Google, MasterCard, a deep investment in improving the state of Black women. No discussion whatsoever in regard to the state of Black men or boys, for that matter, not in any significant way. If anybody has any data on a nonprofit, those running nonprofits disaggregated by race and gender, please let me know. My suspicion is that you'll find, as far as Black folk are concerned, that Black women tend to lead that industry more so than Black men. Activism, we've seen, especially post 2015, a real narrative to eliminate Black males except as victims, but not in terms of the focus of policy, not in terms of the focus of leadership, and definitely not in terms of the focus of resources that are extended on the basis of that tragedy. Those resources that, people send in hopes to, to eliminate the arbitrary killing of Black men, things of that nature. Despite the donations that come in sometimes in the billions, none of that goes to actually changing the lives of Black males, particularly heterosexual Black males, who are the ones dying to the greatest degree. So in terms of activism, there's been a kind of usurping of it, as with the other areas I've mentioned. And it works primarily in the interest of women and girls in the community. The Black family itself as an institution, we've known for decades now, is primarily run by Black women, right? Families our children are born nearly at 80% to Black female headed households. So the family is not run by Black men. If we were to talk about entrepreneurship, the emphasis on identifying and helping entrepreneurs or celebrating Black entrepreneurship is overwhelmingly targeted at women, even though Black men, which we recently found out about a month ago, that Black men actually did have more entrepreneurial businesses. You wouldn't know it because nobody discusses it, right? Nobody celebrates it. It is primarily focused on Black female entrepreneurs. And last year, especially during the first, 8-9 months of the pandemic, but even to now, any emphasis on small businesses and entrepreneurship in the Black community in terms of material assistance was earmarked either for race. So it would be earmarked for Black people or for women in general or for Black women, but nothing for Black male entrepreneurs. So yet another area where we see Black males invisible. You're going to talk about state assistance, whether you're talking about TANF or WIC or SNAP, any of these programs, hyper emphasis on women. There was a long-standing practice where men couldn't get it, the man in the house rule, and even when that practice was formally done away with, the rates didn't change. Men, by and large, don't necessarily benefit from state assistance in the ways that women do. And even heading into the pandemic, where we started to see Black male homelessness, especially for those coming out of prison, reaching incredible numbers, up to 80, 90% in some major urban cities, there's been very little emphasis on that. Even when we were talking about homelessness last year, and we found that Black America constituted half of the country's homeless, there was no emphasis on Black males, who the overwhelming majority of the Black homeless were. Again, a lot of this being precipitated by incarceration, but yet and still no emphasis. And again, and you guys have heard me say this quite a bit, even when Black men have housing vouchers upon getting out of prison, they're often not able to get it, which just, more so leads them into homelessness. And as we discuss this month, the end of the rent moratorium, again, Black men fall into this invisible realm. I hear the emphasis being placed on women and children, and I hear the emphasis in the Black community being placed on women. Nobody wants to talk about the fact that the men have been in the streets for years, especially in the last year. very few reports or discussions about where Black men actually are. And so when you hear these reports about how we need to focus on Black girls and Black women and homelessness and the rent moratorium, just remember that the degree to which Black men are not mentioned, even though it gives the suggestion that Black males are doing well and everybody else is struggling, keep it in mind, play it in your own head. It's actually that they were already in the street. So even though by the end of June, I think it's June 30th, we're waiting to see if Biden is going to do something to stem the rent moratorium, Black male homelessness has already long since occurred, pre-pandemic. And in the pandemic, more than likely gotten worse, but we've gotten very little data about it, right? And even if you talk about Medicaid, things of that nature, not as strong an emphasis on Black males. Hell, it's a question of whether or not Black males live long enough to benefit from it. So I mentioned all those different areas: religion, education, the private industry, nonprofit, activism, the Black family itself, entrepreneurship, state assistance, Medicaid. I talk about those things and I bring them up to talk about the overwhelming shift of focus on women and girls. So it's not just in the academy, it's happening in society. And I wanted to provide that backdrop because by the time you start to talk about this, the academy, and in particular, Black folk in the academy, and especially in regard to Africana studies, I wanted to give you a framework for what's happening in the larger society as a whole, right? Black men are finding themselves, absent. Now, so again, based on the graduation rates, based on, those going to college, the numbers for Black males tend to be low, even at Fresno State. We literally have, last I checked, if I'm able to get the data, which is not every year, it's less than 400, I think, at this point, Black males, and they don't disaggregate the data in terms of, Africans and African Americans, so it might be lower than that. But when I got there in 2008, 2009, it was probably 3 times that number. And I have a program that we are still running to support Black male students, the Onyx Black Male Collective. But, when we tried to support the students, they weren't there. We pressured the university to help us get more students, more Black male students at that. We did, but it was difficult to get them to disaggregate, again, the data. So how many of them were actually African Americans? Very difficult to tell. But you see the point that I'm getting at. See the point. So as we talk about Black studies and its evolution from Black studies to African American studies to Africana studies, the emphasis on Black males has dramatically shifted in focus, right? To the degree where Black males themselves are finding themselves almost under assault. It's almost like I wouldn't even call it a Cold War. It's almost like a silent war. Shots are being fired. Kind of have a sense of where they're coming from, but you dare not say it. I was talking to a brother who's in the field, very, very well positioned in terms of the amount of work he's put in to get where he is. And we were having a conversation the other night, and he said something to me I found interesting. He said one of the things he's noticed a lot amongst his students was that there's been a new mantra, if you will. Now, I've seen this mantra in action, but I hadn't actually heard people say it. And I'm going to paraphrase it, but the mantra basically says that I am for the upliftment of Black folk, but Black females first. I guess, if you will, we can call it BF1. And there's a strong collective of women who have been trained and indoctrinated into a BF1 structure, formally in the academy, but you can also get this in popular media. Again, Oprah opened the door for that, right? She really kind of, brought in a certain type of feminism and broadcast it to mainstream culture in a way where you had generations of Black women who wouldn't call themselves feminists who were using Black feminist talking points and rhetoric because they were getting it through popular culture, even though they had never actually read Patricia Hill Collins. They never actually read Bell Hooks. They were still getting the popular narratives of it coming through popular media. Right? So that being said, we now have BF1. BLM, for example, is a BF1 organization, Black females first. But what we're finding more and more, and this has been going on for a while. I mean, in the 80s, if you went to school and you took gender studies, you more than likely were introduced to, feminist theory. Was what it was, right? That's still the case, but it's gotten more forthright, more aggressive. At this point, to speak to Black upliftment is synonymous with prioritizing Black women and girls, often at the expense of Black boys and men. That's where we've gotten. That's the era we're in at this point. And much of that has influenced the field of Africana Studies. It is a field that has shifted in relation to the gender wars, in relation to the representation wars. These, particularly in the 80s and 90s, there was a huge emphasis on media representation, and there were all kinds of arguments back and forth about the validity of it, the relevance of it. And really, when you add in intersectionality in 1989, Kimberly Crenshaw, what you end up with in this stew of ideas as it pertains to Africana Studies, as it pertains to Black folk in the academy and Black folk at large, a hyper emphasis on Black women and girls and LGBT on the basis of the idea that if Black women, girls, and LGBT are placed on a platform and elevated, everybody else will be elevated as well. We go back to, a rising tide lifts all boats. None of this has actually had any serious or material impact on the group that has suffered the most. Whether you like it or not, whether you want to talk about the victimization of Black men or not, it is what it is. Black men find themselves on the bottom of everything, from life expectancy to employment. It is what it is. You can sidestep it, you can ignore it. That's what the fuck it is. So, in the field itself, we've learned to not talk about Black males at all. To do so is in and of itself synonymous with misogyny, sexism. So the emphasis is on women and girls. How do I know that? Well, I'll give you some examples on a couple of different areas where we can see how this kind of plays out. All right. So I'm talking about Black studies and the usurping of the field by Black feminism, Black queer studies. All right. So this is a quote, and this comes from my good brother Tommy Curry, and he wrote a piece several years ago that you can, I think you'll be able to find if you go to academia.com. This is a piece entitled "Black Studies, Not Morality: Anti-Black Racism, Neoliberal Co-optation, and the Challenges to Black Studies under Intersectional Axioms." Let's see if I can enlarge it. And I'm only enlarging it so that you can screenshot it. It might be something you want to look to or look at later at your discretion. It is, written for an academic audience. So I will kind of break down the highlights of it at the end. So bear with me for a moment. But he wrote this piece as an analysis of the state of Black studies. And in the conclusion on page 20, he states, "There are no liberation strategies against anti-Blackness that can occur within discourses or debates, presuming the liberatory processes of dialectic and dialogic remedy if the categories Black people are confined to remain enclosed within the assumptions and predilections of European man. The oppositional logic ignited by the deployment of gender constructions on Black bodies, making the Black hetero male the mimetic equivalent of white patriarchy, as well as the assumptions of Enlightenment liberalism codified as recognition of the plight/invisibility of the racial gendered marginalized other, concretizes rather than dispels the mythology of Black pathology. To suggest that within Blackness, the zones of non-being that precede the genocidal rage of white negrophobia, Black inhumanity is imitative, not only desiring, but confining itself to the existing oppressive relations of white people to the world. It's to hold that within Black people unable to live out their existentially known humanity under white supremacy, there actually resides multiple axes of self-actualization and the hierarchicalized power over other non-beings that remain structured, existing, and a mirroring of white actualized being. This thesis, which selectively assigns moral revelation and escapism to intersectional subjects, ultimately suggests that Black life, Black existence, has no content and substance of its own. It is to theorize Blackness as completely mimetic and impotent to create fundamentally different relations to the world and others outside of the colonial meanings and oppositions taken to be essential to race, class, and gender. Right? Now, that is definitely a mouthful, and there is quite a bit there, and I am not going to pretend to go through all of that, because that it was a 25-page paper that he sent to me, single lined, I believe. So it's an extensive piece, and there's a lot being argued there. So I cannot do it justice in this discussion in its entirety, but I will take out elements of it that speak to what I'm talking about. And one of the things he dealt with in that piece is the perception of hetero Black males, right? And he says one of the things that became very popular in the field itself was the idea that Black males were mimetic. Black males were to be seen and treated, because the idea was that they themselves argue for an attempt to be white men. And it is not the case. And if you've read The Man Not, he goes into greater detail about how that is not the case. Nevertheless, this became, in many ways, as far as gender is concerned, Black gender, the prevailing idea about how to perceive Black men. So in the academy, what we're looking at within Black studies, now mind you, women's studies, Asian studies, Chicano Latino studies, all these different fields of study came after Black studies. Black studies kicked open the door as far as that, right? But at a particular point, just as the activist movement, the civil rights movement, ended up giving way to the women's movement, much happened in the same way with Black studies. The emphasis on race gave way to the emphasis on gender. And in that switching over, and I am simplifying, maybe even oversimplifying some things that require a lot of nuance we just don't have time for. One of the things we noticed was a dramatic shift to villainizing Black men, making them mimetically similar, if not identical, to white men, and thus justifying the elimination, right, and the obliviousness that is well practiced now as it relates to Black men. Right? So that's one of the things we kind of noticed. If we're going to talk about the actual theoretical structure of the field and how gender has, gender and sexuality have played a serious role in reimagining how Africana studies identifies itself, one of the main themes that we have to get to is the villainization of Black men from within Africana studies. So the field that I've given myself to since 94, you figure 27 years, there was a dramatic shift in how Black men were seen. And here's the thing, Black men were not prepared for this. Those who went into Black studies to become professors, especially, much of the time they were nationalists. These were brothers who were looking to uplift the community, whatnot. We were not prepared to have gender weaponized against Black men, or manhood, or maleness at that, because it also meant the obliviousness toward boys. We weren't prepared for any of that. And many of us didn't know how to necessarily deal with it either. It became one of those things that had a serious impact on even how we began to theorize, even about non-gendered studies or non-gendered issues. But you couldn't get away from gender if you were considered a serious scholar. And in order to deal with gender, you had to defer to feminism. You couldn't be critical of it, not if you wanted to get anything published. And there are other reasons for that, because it's not just limited to the theories, right? It's not just limited to the theories that you're allowed to discuss. It also had to do with who was present. What do I mean by that? Well, if you talk about, and I've said this several years in a row, but I'm just going to focus on 1 year. There are a couple of organizations that are central to the field, but the one I always attended, the conferences I attended, were the National Council for Black Studies. And let me see here. One of the things I found when I attended a conference in New Orleans, 2019, a couple years ago, I got into the habit of counting the number of presentations at the annual conferences that were presented on the subject of Black men and boys. Now that meant anybody could be presenting on them. They weren't necessarily just presented by Black men. And one of the things I found just at that conference, and I'd been seeing this the years leading up to this, but the numbers had only gotten worse, right? So I wrote a message and I posted it on Facebook at one point. I said, a taste of the field of Africana studies. As I am attending the National Council for Black Studies conference in New Orleans, I've counted 9 sessions and panels on Black males and 23 on Black women, nearly 3 times as many. There are more than 7 times as many papers studying Black women and girls than men and boys in the field, and in the only field unapologetically focuses on Black people. So the only field that unapologetically focuses on Black people, you have an eliminating of a focus on Black males. Matter of fact, hold on. I don't think I put these, or we'll come back to some of these in a moment. This was a picture of one of the panels I attended. So even though you had a panel discussion on Africana Studies on Black males, only one panel person came. And this was pretty consistent across the panels that I found. And of those who patronized the panel, you're seeing the room. About 4 people, counting myself. The opposite was the case as it pertained to Black women and girls. And this also had to do with the membership of those who were there in attendance. It was, and I don't have exact numbers. I'm just counting. I'm just looking. It was probably an 8-to-2 ratio of Black women to Black males. Right? One of the flagship organizations in the field. Every field has a flagship organization or two, and it's customary. It also has to do with job advancement, sometimes even job interviews, where you participate in the annual conference of your field. Right? Each field has it. That's where you get the cutting edge work in your field. That's where you meet the scholars. That's where you present work so people know where you're at. And that may even be where you engage in interviews if you're trying to get a job in another university, whatever. So the conferences are a big deal in the flagship organizations for your field. And sometimes there are more than one, but this is the one I had always attended, mainly because my mentor was a past president, and he began to bring us as early as 1994, 95, I believe it was the first ones I started to attend. And I used to see fairly significant numbers of men. Yes, Donnie, like NSBE, I believe. Yeah. Each field, I don't care if you're in engineering, sociology, history, every field has its flagship organizations. You need to participate in them, to function in your field. This is how you keep up with the advancements. This is what goes on. So you can see what I'm talking about right here, right? I didn't take a picture of the panels I went to for women and girls, but packed capacity, right? Packed capacity. Boys and men as subject matters were virtually ignored. And the numbers every year dwindled as far as the male presence altogether. At some point, I predict one, if not both, of the primary organizations in the field will begin to change its name to focus on women and girls in some way, shape, or form. We'll see. But that's my suspicion, because by and large, they're the only ones there, which also has to do, right, with those who are graduating, those who are even able to make it into college, let alone who are able to stay for graduate school and participate in the field. But this is what we're looking at. How much emphasis there is in remedying this and outwardly challenging the absence of males? Very little. But why would there be if the perception of Black males, the dominant perception, is that we are attempting to be mimetic copies of white men, and therefore we should be treated as such? Why would there be a call to eliminate the exclusion of Black men and boys from higher education, let alone from being received as human beings in a field of study that prioritizes Black folk? Right? So that's the first thing. Let's talk about faculty. The numbers of faculty, again, this is important because it has to do with the very people that are involved, very people who are even present to espouse ideas in the classroom. That will have an impact on which ideas get spread, which ideas are considered central, which ideas are considered important. That has to do with who's actually in the classroom teaching. I'm going to pull yet again from my brother Tommy Curry, but this is from a paper he and his wife, Gynetta Curry, wrote together. And the paper is entitled "On the Perils of Race, Neutrality, and Anti-Blackness." Let me see something. I don't remember if I made, yeah, I did. I made a slide so you guys can see this one. Okay. On the perils of race neutrality and anti-Blackness, Doctors Tommy and Gynetta Curry note in their epic co-authored piece that there are roughly 117,000 Black professors, 70,737 Black women, 46,651 Black males in the academy altogether, against about 1.27 million whites, roughly 664,000 white men, 616,000 white women. Although there are slightly more white male academics than female, that dynamic is reversed for Black professors. Approximately 23,000 more Black women than men in 2011. See the American Association of University Professors April 2014 report. According to the National Center for Education Statistics, there are more Black women faculty at the lecturer, instructor, and assistant professor levels than Black men, but are at roughly even rates at the associate and full professor ranks. Now, why is that important? It speaks to who is actually espousing what ideas and where, as it pertains to the classroom, as it pertains to the conferences, and even though not noted here, as it pertains to who's publishing in the field. In other words, Black men are not considered a priority and thus are not present. How much of a push there is to remedy that? Nil. Right? So the point I'm getting at in regard to that is when you talk about the people in the actual room, they don't include Black men. Thus, the ideas that are exalted in the field are nil. Now, this is another piece I'm not going to spend a lot of time on, but I might have to enlarge this too. Here you go. So this here, just real quick, this is based off of a survey conducted in 2013 of who chairs Black Studies departments. This is a survey of about 1,777 colleges and universities. And basically what you saw was slightly more Black male department program heads than females. But statistically, they're near parity. And again, this is 8 years ago, and I would argue this is probably radically changed. But still, Africana Studies in and of itself is probably the most progressive field in terms of leadership. You know, leadership programs in terms of, chairing departments, so on and so forth. This is 8 years ago, right? But what I'm saying to you is, for the most part, it is a fairly progressive field. And even though you probably have more gender parity in regard to field leadership, or at least you did, there's still a severe absence when it comes to the theorization around Black males. You know, around, and not only the theorization, but who actually graduates from the field, who actually becomes faculty. There's a severe obliviousness about Black boys. Now, where does this all take us? Well, if you look at the outcomes of this absence of Black males, there are a couple of things that come about from this. First of which are, and this has to do with the conversations I've been having with Black men who've reached out to me. Now, they've asked that I keep their identities private. It is what it is. You got people who are afraid of losing their positions. And I don't mean afraid. I'm not suggesting that they're cowards, anything along those lines. They, these are people that have kids to feed. It is what it is. But because of the absence of Black males in many different universities, even at the faculty and administrative levels, what you find is a severe vulnerability to speaking one's mind. And so you have a lot of Black males that stay quiet for the sake of maintaining their positions. And they have to, right? So one of the brothers I talked to, and I've spoken to a few in the last week, and this tends to happen to me regularly. I get brothers that reach out to me to share their experiences, because they can't share them anywhere else, right? So they share them with me. One of the things we can talk about is bullying techniques, such as reputation malignment. And what does that mean? That means that in the last 5 years alone, there's been an uptick, right, in the number of men who've been arbitrarily accused of everything from harassment to sexual assault. Now, here's the thing. On university campuses, how much of that requires evidence? Very little. So what tends to happen? There are men who are likely doing this, not denying that in the slightest. Not. Although we're going to ignore women that do it, and we're going to act like that doesn't even happen, right? We're going to treat it like a statistical anomaly, even though even I can tell you stories about sexual harassment at work and in the academy, even going back to being a student. I remember Black female professors who required sex for grade, but there was no conversation about it. I had employers that required sex for me to keep my job, and other Black men, of course. No discussion about it. Matter of fact, certain time periods, if you tried to go in and report it, you'd be laughed out of the offices. Wouldn't be taken seriously. And I've still gotten reports from Black men today, even in university settings, that when they have tried to report their own sexual harassment, that there's been nothing done about it. But one of the things we're also starting to see, and this is not only limited to faculty, it's also being extended to students at different universities, is how exactly to accuse men of crimes in regard to crimes of a sexual nature, again, with no evidence, and malign his reputation, or to go one step further, threaten to do so. There are Black men that have reached out to me to tell me stories about how their entire professional reputations have been maligned. It's arbitrarily at that. It has stemmed their career advancement, even though they themselves insist they didn't do anything, and there was no evidence required for these accusations to have impact on their careers. Where is the discussion for them? There isn't one, because to entertain a discussion for them is tantamount to supporting rape, as far as people imagine it. And where that leaves innocent men? Nowhere. So these brothers have reached out to me in a variety of ways, and this happens at least a couple times a month. They reach out and tell me the most horrendous stories and the things that they've had to do to try and keep food on the table, despite that their reputations were torn apart and nobody cared, right? So the extent to which everything from false claims to threats and bullying has played a role, right? That's one aspect. We can also talk about publications. It's a requirement to publish if you want to advance as a scholar in your field. But ideologically speaking, if you try to publish, especially against the tide of the trend, right, you'll be hard pressed to find a way to do so. This has a direct impact on one's ability to advance their career. So what did Kwame Brown call it? The go along to get along game? It applies to the university as well. One has to go along to get along, especially in regard to gender analyses, right? Because there's only one acceptable gender framework in the academy as it pertains to Black folk. And that's primarily Black feminism and Black queer studies. Or, that's it. That's why I propose Black masculinism, to provide an ideological umbrella for those who would like to actually study and articulate what goes on with Black men beyond stereotypical tropes of Black toxic masculinity. But that's limited in terms of scope. And when it comes to trying to publish, be it in a journal or at a press, you will find yourself pushed out, which, as I said, again, has a direct impact on your ability to publish and participate in your field. Another area is job hire / promotion disruption. Black men who openly advocate for Black males, especially hetero males, in their work will find themselves maligned in terms of being able to secure jobs elsewhere, especially if the majority on the job hire committee or in the department itself or the program itself happen to be Black feminists, male or female, even though there's usually a larger number of females. Many of those men will find themselves unable to secure new employment elsewhere. Because basically what we're talking about is not a field of study or a series of ideological standpoints, where even if you're going to talk about identity calculus, or this identity framework that we get out of intersectionality that tells us with an almost mathematical equation who is the most oppressed. Even if that's the framework you're going to use, Black males don't find themselves in a position to be able to speak with authority, regardless of the evidence. So when it comes to being able to secure jobs elsewhere or be promoted within your own university, if you advocate for Black males openly in your research, you may find it extremely difficult. You may be leveled with accusations of sexism or misogyny, not because of what you've said about women, but because of what you haven't. In other words, you focused on Black males. That is enough. So you'll find Black males kind of pushed out in regard to that, job hires and promotion. Ideological anti-Black misandry. This is what I spoke to when I read the first piece by Tommy Curry, where he talks about the perception of Black men in the field. In other words, in order for you to progress and be considered an acceptable scholar, you have to defer to Black feminism. And you have to do so by demonstrating a willingness to entertain a certain degree of ideological anti-Black misandry in your work. You have to espouse it and you have to support it. Here's my warning, by the way, so small aside. Here's my warning to those who do this. They eat their mascots too. Just so you know. You can kiss ass as long as you want, but at some point, they eat their mascots. So anyway, the last area I'll bring up out of the 5, right? So there's bullying techniques as reputation malignment. There's, being expunged from publishing. There's job hire and promotion disruption. There's ideological anti-Black misandry. That is the subject matter of your research. And then lastly, there's organizational and resource alienation and hoarding. Now, what do I mean by that? What do I mean by that? When I talk about organizational alienation, WG, appreciate that. Right. Organizational and resource alienation and hoarding. What I'm saying to you is that, as I showed with NCBS, there's no push to identify Black males who've been alienated in the field. Matter of fact, one of the going things you'll find at most academic conferences in regard to gender presentations, right, panels, the argument is that if you have a panel, especially one on men and boys, there needs to be, quote unquote, diversity. You got to have women. You got to have LGBT present. Or it's, received as a misogynist panel in and of itself. Now, when you go to panels that are primarily filled with women presenting, particularly on Black feminist issues, there's no such requirement for diversity, especially as it pertains to hetero men or hetero men subject matter regarding hetero men, unless it's punitive, unless it's some type of withering critique. That's acceptable. But one that actually promotes hetero Black male humanity as human rather than, some type of boogeyman, not necessarily. Right? That's kind of how that goes. So that being said, that's one example. When I talk about organizational, I'm talking about the actual downplaying and elimination of males from organizations, whether we're talking about academic organizations or we can go to, groups like BLM. This is one of the things I've been talking about. Except BLM was far more explicit in stating that hetero men will not hold any positions of leadership. I remember that being stated very early on. And even when they stopped saying it publicly, you saw it in who led what and what organizations. And the organizations that were regional and local that were led by heterosexual Black men were downplayed. And I almost guarantee you received very little to no funding when Patrice Cullors started to disseminate some of the resources that BLM had obtained. This is what I mean by the organizational downplaying of Black men, right? But resource alienation has to do with just that. So again, earlier I talked about Goldman Sachs, Visa, MasterCard, so on and so forth, private corporations. And you can even apply this to some degree to the nonprofit, arm as well. They overwhelmingly target Black women and girls. And how many of these Black women and girls reflect any of this funding on their boys, their sons? We're not even talking about giving men jobs per se. We're emphasizing men and boys. How many of them actually use this in some way to uplift the whole community? There's no data to say specifically. Haven't seen any charts or reports, but one of the things I can say just from being in these various fields and having conversations, I've not heard of it. The hyper focus tends to be primarily on Black women and girls by Black women at the expense of, if no one else, their metaphorical sons, their metaphorical husbands, their more metaphorical partners. In other words, Black men are not able to benefit from any of these resources that consider them invisible. What effect does that have over the next 20 to 30 years in the Black community? I'm curious. You tell me. This is what I meant when I talked about the kind of social gentrification of the community. When you invest in one demographic on gender grounds and push for their advancement, whether it's in education, whether it's in administration, whether it's in the nonprofit realm or private philanthropy, and you completely ignore the other, especially if that other is at the bottom of every freaking metric you can find. What does that do? And to what extent? Appreciate that, WG. To what extent does that impact the future of the family, let alone the community? And when you look at these attacks, like on Black Twitter, of songs like Catering to You, you see this misandry is deep seated at this point. How many people care? I can't say, because the women that care and the men that care are fairly silent too often, because they're afraid of being attacked. So what I've been pushing for in many ways has been to include Black males. I am, if you will, BM1, because I can't conceptualize a community that is supposed to exist off the labor and the sacrifice of Black men, and then turn around and have them be completely oblivious. Whether it's the grandfathers who put families in homes, whether it's the brothers who work and bring home money to families, whether it's those who are in the academy doing research, it doesn't matter, whether it's the activists on the street. If you're going to eliminate Black males from every possible facet of Black life and tell them they aren't shit, and you do so verbally, but as well as administratively, as well, in terms of who actually gets in, graduates, so on and so forth. If that level of misandry is going to be acceptable in every context we can think of that pertains to Blackness, there is nowhere else that can go. And so I push for Black males to really begin to advocate for themselves. Now, I'm going to bring on my good brother, because I think he can help me break into this with a little more depth. And this is something that he's had some experience with himself. Brother Gigi, are you there? I've had him waiting for a while, so he might have stepped away. But this is the experience we're having. That's what we're looking at. When I talk about Africana Studies, in many ways, in the academy, this should be a refuge for Black students. And in too many instances, it isn't. Now, that isn't to say that the field is invalid or that there's no one there. It really comes down to, in many ways, the individual professors and the willingness they have to engage this absence. So if you are a Black male looking to go into the field, it's a question of finding people who are willing to support that. And there are people that are willing. You just can't take it for granted that they're there the way one might have been able to decades ago. I couldn't say. I lucked out when it came to Dr. Little, my mentor, but that wasn't a common thing. Not a common thing. Yeah, I think Gigi stepped away. So hit me in the back chat, Gigi, when you get back, if you can hear this. All right. So this is what I'm talking about. How exactly can we get to the point where we're able to focus on Black males without it being demonized and villainized? How do we do that? How do we do it and have it be received despite people have learned to ignore it? That's what we're looking at. This is why I said I entitled this, and I pulled the title from a private conversation I was having with BGS. And he just kind of said it arbitrarily, and we started laughing. He said, all roads lead back to the Black Gynarchy. And I said, you know what? That is exactly the theme I'm trying to get at in my show this week. If you want to advance, this is what's required of you, right? To emphasize the Gynocracy. Okay, hold on. What's up, man?
What's going on, man?
How you doing?
I apologize for what went down earlier with the audio.
No problem. It's all good.
Man, just nursing my my mouth after oral surgery, but I'm good though. What's going on?
Well, man, we dealing with Africana Studies. We're dealing with the academy, and we're dealing with the acceptable misandry that has become, I think, a hallmark of Black academic work. And I thought, who could I speak to that might have something to say about this? And
yeah.
I had to come to you, man. Any thoughts on the subject, brother?
Yeah, it's tragic though, because when you trace the steps of the origin of African American studies, it started from Black power politics, and students in California demanding that they be, exposed to a curriculum that, let them know about the injustices that they had suffered from, and, people who look to ameliorate the conditions that Black folks found themselves in. It went from that to, this kind of like East Coast, elitist, assimilationist, take on African American studies. And then it went from that to the interpolation of women and gender studies into African American studies via the intersectionality postulation that, women don't just experience racism, qua racism, they experience it racism, class, gender, sexuality, and ableness, and so here we are now. I mean, this is just it's a way to continuously X people who are considered to be part of the patriarchy or whatever Manichaean dualism you create, and you want to create the evil side of it.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
attach it to what arbitrary group you may.
Mm-hmm.
But and this is what Black men are resisting against. But in the academy, it's difficult to do because everywhere around you, everyone accepts this thesis that, yeah, if you're a woman and you're Black, then you're doubly oppressed, or that somehow there's a unique form of oppression that you experience that no one else does. But Black men keep getting killed.
Well, and
or they keep finding themselves homeless,
exactly.
or they keep finding themselves, incarcerated, or they keep finding, Black males keep finding themselves going from the school to the prison pipeline, or they find themselves in all of these situations in which other demographics don't find themselves. Like Black women don't find themselves as homeless as Black men. Not to say that there is none, but it's not at the rate that you find it among Black men. You don't see the same illiteracy rates. You don't see the same levels of incarceration. You don't see the same kinds of homicide, commitment and victimization. You just don't see it. So it's as if.
Let me add to that real quick, though. That's one of the things that Athena Matua recognized. She's the author of was it Progressive Black Males? No, damn it, I used her book for years. How do I forget the title? But I'm gonna pull it up. But she was actually an intersectionalist for a good period of time. And when she actually started to do the research, oh, damn it, I didn't even see who. Man, my computer blipped up. I didn't even see who that. There it is. WG. Appreciate the support. Anyway, when she actually came out, her book was Progressive Black Masculinities. That's right. And she was doing work on intersectionality. When she actually started to look at the data, and this is in line with Darren Hutchinson and a few others, she realized that the argument didn't hold. And so she developed a whole different area, multi-sectionality, to try and account for the extent to which intersectionality didn't apply to Black men, right? And yet, when we start to see it even within these departments where you have Black males who are being kept out of positions, like whether they're chairing departments or when they're actually maligned and kept out by women who are working in tangent to one another, you really start to ask, you start to have to step back and say, well, what exactly is happening here? What exactly is going on? There's nothing that we've been prepared for. What are your thoughts?
No, because we had no understanding of what actually was occurring. I mean, these women decided that they were at war with men, yes. Period.
Yes.
and yes. Men didn't see that. And men still don't see that.
They still don't see it.
They just refuse to look it in the face. They just don't, like, it doesn't matter if you're a Black nationalist. It doesn't matter if you're an Afrocentric. It doesn't matter if you're, a Nation of Islam, brother. It doesn't matter where you fall within the scope and the range of Black life. Doesn't matter. They're in war with you. They declared war.
Yeah.
I mean, you should see some of the things that they say. Like, I mean, you know, kill men now. Ask me how. It doesn't matter what race or what class they're from. They're all bastards, and they need to be, you know, restricted. They need to be drained of their power, because the ominous and the evil patriarchy is what creates life, a life of discomfort and oppression and domination for women. This, I mean, hey, bro, like, but these people don't want to look it in the face. They don't want to stare it in the face. And I'm gonna tell you how it happened, bro. I can't speak for African American studies. You know, African American studies started with students protesting,
right,
and you know, entering into offices and spaces in the academy and demanding, you know, the administration and the faculty to give them the kind of programs that they wanted. Okay, so it started off radical, but in, you know, women and gender studies, man, as far as I'm concerned, it was a bunch of white men who said, look, we're going to give the darkies and we're going to give the women their own programs, okay? And we're going to pretty much leave them unobstructed and allow them to do their thing. We're not going to bother them. They're going to have their own spaces and wings in humanities or social sciences departments. We're not going to interfere with them in what they do, okay? They're here for diversity purposes, and everybody else do what you do and don't worry about them and leave them to their own devices, okay? But increasingly, I mean, you know, their influence and power has stretched throughout the, you know, the university itself, to the point where, you know, they've taken over human resources departments. They've taken over administration positions. You know, the government has, you know, come out with acts and titles, you know, you know, in policy that basically, you know, demonstrates that they need to be given a seat at the table. And all the while, you know, the most injurious thing to black men is, damn, how all of a sudden did the people who were whipped, enslaved, and lynched the most, all of a sudden in collusion with the very same motherfuckers who did all this shit? Like, how does that occur? Like, so black men are scratching their heads like, how the fuck did it come? Excuse me for cursing, bro, but I mean, you have to understand the level of frustration that men are dealing with. Like, okay, wait a minute. You mean, so I'm a person who belongs to a demographic of people who were killed the most, lynched the most, enslaved the most, disrespected the most, but now I'm part of the very thing that committed all of those atrocities against me. I seek to uphold or imitate that which sought to destroy and enslave me. So you have to keep me in check, not based upon what you can prove or demonstrate empirically, but what you say our ambitions will be if we are, to any degree, able to flourish, function, and to thrive as any other human being will be able to do. And this is the important part, you know, like of Curry. It's like, this mimetic, imitative ambition claims being made about us. Like we want to reproduce white patriarchy, and like, come on, man. Like, black men are some of the most progressive people. We you know, we take care of our kids. We don't say that women should be in the house making sandwiches and be barefoot and pregnant. You know, I mean,
making sandwiches.
I know it sounds stupid, but I mean, this is how they're caricaturizing us and what they say we are in terms of, you know, our progressiveness, that there is none in us.
Yeah.
That you know, if black men were to ascend and to have, you know, parity with white men, that we would reproduce the same patriarchy that white men did in the terrible way that they have. But there's no evidence that even men throughout the world have done the same thing that white men have done. I mean, maybe I'm confused about it. I mean, did the Africans do exactly what white men have done? I mean, did they create like a scheme to create colonies all throughout the entirety of the known world?
No, but here's one of the things we have to deal with in terms of how this conversation happens. When you talk about Black patriarchy, a lot of what will happen is people will use individual anecdotes to account for something that's supposed to be systemic. So when you ask your question, is this something Black men did, or even African men? What will often happen is they'll take a specific person who abused somebody, raped somebody, beat somebody, and that's supposed to stand in for Black men as a whole. And many of us are not prepared to actually, look at that and say, wait a minute, that's an anecdote. Give me the statistics. Give me the data on that. And
they don't care about the data. They don't care about the statistics. See, this is right now they're engaged in what I would consider to be confirmation bias, man. All this shit is a group of people that have created a non-academic discipline. It's a political discipline is what it is, that has it is primary ideological, not really based on, in empirics as much as it's based in, a certain political orientation. And it's been allowed to gain weight. And now it's a monster now. And so how do you deal with it now? It's out of control now. It's everywhere now. And nobody has the intellectual and conceptual tools to actually go against it. And if you do go against it, oh man, be prepared to hear or to feel the backlash. So you got men who have to basically tuck their tails and duck their heads and say, okay, well, you're right. I'm a bad man. I have the potential to be evil. Like, dude, I taught an AFAM one year, and in the philosophy department, they didn't tell us what to teach. I mean, they were like, okay, you can teach whatever you want, like literally, like you are perfectly autonomous. You can teach whoever and however you want. You want to teach Iceberg Slim?
Mm-hmm.
You can teach Iceberg Slim. We don't give a damn. We're not monitoring you like that. I went to AFAM. They were like, okay, well, you got to teach Kimberly Crenshaw. You got to teach,
it's a religion.
Audre Lorde. You got to teach. They were like, you have to teach, Black trans culture. And I'm like, damn, I got to do all this. I ain't got to do this.
But there's another part to this, though. Because you're talking about what happens in the classroom, which is more than valid. But I'm also looking at who gets to graduate. Do you know how many graduate students reach out to me from across the country and ask me to sit on dissertation committees, master's thesis committees, because they're worried that they can't actually talk about Black men without some level of administrative defense? Right. In other words, they have panels and the only people they have to choose from are hardcore feminists that will not allow them to study Black males unless done so from this kind of standpoint that we're talking about, this misandric standpoint. So I get brothers that reach out to me, but here's the other twist. I also get brothers that reach out to me to tell me how they've been kicked out of graduate school because their interests in terms of their research is not supported. And this is after coursework. Arbitrarily.
Oh, that's some bullshit. You can't do that, man. That's a lawsuit. But I mean,
if you can
I feel that's a lawsuit.
But especially if you can afford to levy one. But you're talking about a lot of brothers coming out of very poor circumstances, and their big issue at that point is, if I'm out of grad school, how am I going to eat? Where am I going to stay? Right. And this is, of course, pre-pandemic. But these are the kind of brothers that are reaching out to me to tell me, yeah, 2 years ago I was kicked out, or nobody would support my dissertation or my thesis, and but these are the unspoken stories that nobody wants to talk about. And the real punishment that they're enduring is for not espousing the feminist line. And they're not even opposing it. They're just researching, and they're interested in researching areas that pertain to Black male life outside of the parameters of what's considered in vogue. and they get no support. And this has everything to do with who's in the room. This is why I talked about the number of faculty and where it becomes important. Because if black men aren't faculty and they're not present, and there's not a proliferation of areas that black men are willing to engage in that allow for students to engage research on black men from a variety of standpoints that may stand outside of feminist approaches, what you get is a narrowing of the field and a religiosity to what's considered acceptable. And I think that's where we are right now. I think feminism has become such an entrenched religion. This is why I talked about all the different areas where we're seeing a hyper focus on women and girls from a feminist standpoint, institutionally, materially, in terms of policy, in the classroom, systemically. We're seeing this major shift because it's almost become like a religion unto itself. That's what I'm seeing.
It's definitely a religion, but put it this way. I don't know if you ever heard of Thomas Kuhn, but he's an American philosopher of science, and he wrote a book called The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. Okay, and I don't know if you ever heard of him, but he came up with the idea of a paradigm shift, right? Mm-hmm. So I know you've heard of the idea of a paradigm shift. Right now, what we find ourselves in is a particular paradigm.
Okay.
But what he says is, I mean, the general view that Kuhn has is, okay, science takes place in, a piecemeal way, and nobody really actually rocks the boat or shakes the structure. It's just commonly accepted that, whatever discipline you're in, that scientific work takes place in a particular kind of way, and the assumptions and the ideas contained within the research method of that particular discipline are accepted globally. Okay, but what then happens is you start to get crises when anomalies and when various theories don't corroborate data, or don't match up to what's happening in the world, and the theory can no longer adequately explain phenomena. So that's a crisis. So then what you get is a scientific revolution, which is a paradigm shift. Okay. Right now right now intersectional feminism is the paradigm, and people are pointing out anomalies, which is leading to a crisis, and eventually there needs to be a paradigm shift. But the political will is not there, and this happens in any discipline whatsoever, though. I mean, but here I think it's going to be even more difficult to create the paradigm shift, because this is a science. This is just philosophy, bro.
Though
this has no bearing on science what the fuck soever, man. This is legal scholarship and social scientific. It's not even social science. It's, to be quite honest, it's just philosophy. And not to knock philosophy, but I know its weaknesses. I know its strengths and its weaknesses. But you just can't say, okay, well, I'm going to split human beings into two kinds. You got males and you got females. From the male section of humanity, that's where the evil comes from. From the women, the female side of humanity, that's where all the sugar and spice comes from. So the evil men have created oppression and domination, exploitation and violence for the great and beautiful, nice women. And so now women need to do as much as they can to try to obstruct men from coming to the fore, because men always do what they've always done, which is commit acts of violence, oppress and exploit and dominate, women. Dude, this is bullshit, bro. This is like the same shit that they decry themselves, because men did it at one time. Okay, so if you look at Pythagoras' theory about women, he said the same thing about women. That, okay, men are rational, women are emotional, women are malevolent, men are good, and it's the same thinking, but it's just they flipped the script and they framed the narrative in an entirely different way. Now, not to mention that other people from other cultures don't even think like this. Okay, they have more balanced approaches to passive and active energy, yin yang. I mean, there's a whole different kind of way of thinking that applies to passive and active energy and masculine and feminine energy in cultures. But for some reason, man, we have this dualism right here, and it's gonna stick. It's gonna stay until people actually begin to rock the boat. I mean, you're rocking the boat. Curry's rocking the boat. Ron O'Neal's rocking the boat. There's a whole bunch of other people who are actually rocking it and who are beginning to admit begrudgingly that black men have it really hard. And this narrative that the narrative that you're pushing, it's not entirely accurate. I mean, so there are many people who are coming out who are starting to question the legitimacy and the validity of this theory. But people are, I mean, it's the it thing right now. So people are hesitant and reticent to challenge it for fear that they're going to be, assumed to be misogynist or racist.
Mm-hmm.
So, but bro, black men are looking at this and shaking their head like, you say I'm privileged? It's like your boy Blade. Every time he pops up, somebody makes a donation, he smiles. It's like that. It's like, really? That's what you think? You think I'm privileged? Like, really?
But what you said a moment ago, though, when you were talking about this paradigm shift, I think is important because the kind of oppositional Manichaean setup where, if you emphasize hetero males, you're damn near in mimetic alignment with white men. And on the other side, the just side, you have this link between feminism and queer studies, right? I was having a conversation with a brother who has one foot in Africana and one foot in queer studies. And he said something I'll never forget. He started talking about the ways in which, even as a queer brother writing about black men, he said, there's only a certain type of queer man you can write about. He said, you got to be, and these are his words. He said, you pretty much got to be flaming. But if you want to talk about the experiences queer men have with being beaten by police, pulled over for arbitrary things and hyper fine just because of, he was saying basically, there are plenty of black men who are queer that nobody knows is queer, and they're treated like black men. And as a queer black male scholar, if you want to write about that in relation to queer men, he was saying it wasn't really acceptable. He said the only way you could really write even about queer black men was to hyper fetishize them, much the way white liberal, academics and black feminist academics approve of. But when you want to actually talk about them as black men in association with black maleness or the black male experience, that's downplayed. So when you talk about a paradigm shift, we're talking about, when I push black masculinism, there are linkages that most people wouldn't imagine exist across different ideologies and different fields, but they're not allowed to be explored because of this, religious kind of idea around intersectionality's focus on black women and LGBTs being the most oppressed group, but only a certain slice of what is supposed to be acceptable about black women and LGBTs and men on the other side of that fence. That whole paradigm shift is going to be necessary to break that dynamic down so you can actually have people study what they're interested in so we can create new knowledge about what actually is going on in the world. That has to be broken down.
Yeah, you know what? Some people are going to be against it, like you said. They're going to resist it with every fiber of their being.
Right.
They're going to be. They're going to resist it, bro. Because it's going to challenge their positionality. It's going to challenge their orientation to the world. Is going to challenge. The things they teach or what they consider to be knowledge. And so, and then it's gonna challenge their class structure,
right.
Which nobody wants to do at the current moment, man. Look, I did a show earlier today, man, and I don't know if you had the opportunity to hear any of it at all, but I mean, this is about power and money, man. This is about jobs and resources.
Yeah.
But we need, but they act like they act as if this is about liberation and politics.
No. Right.
This is not about that, bro. All this is about money This is money and resources.
Yes.
And who gets what?
Yes.
From white folks. Who's able to extract what resources from white folks?
Yes.
Okay. And you know, the more we admit that, you know, the better off we'll be. But nobody wants to admit it. But at some point we have to start just keeping it real, man. Like, it's about money and resources and who has access to it. And Black men have never been able to have access comfortably with resources before somebody lays the claim that he doesn't deserve it. And that's the issue we're facing. Everybody else has a turn before us. It's like being in the desert and everybody is getting a sip of water except for the guy who's got scurvy and his lips are blistering from having been there for 40 days and 40 nights.
The one that got there an hour ago is parched.
Right. I mean, this guy's like, I mean, he's dying of thirst, man. Like really in need of some relief. And then everybody else, man, is like, hey, wait a minute, dude. You don't really need this, you know?
I'm a little parched. Let me get the majority of that.
I'm a little more parched than you are, sir. I mean, theoretically. and it's like, what, man? So
he says scurvy.
So but the imitative piece is fuel for the fire, and the abusive, the charges of abuse and malevolency are there. But the thing is, they never point to themselves and the pathology and the malevolence that they put forth in, you know, out here. And so that's what I don't like, bro. You know, I don't like how they minimize their own pathology, you know, exacerbate ours, you know, through all of these narratives and these anecdotes. And, you know, we end up being the boogeyman. They end up being the damsels. And they end up reproducing white supremacy. In my viewpoint, man, if anybody wants to be ambitious in relation to whiteness, it's Black women, bro. But nobody wants to admit that. To admit that would be to commit a sin. But they're the ones reproducing whiteness, not us. I mean, where you want to start with this? From appearance? From hair? I mean, like, how far do you want to go with this? To makeup? To the way they dress? Like, if anybody wants to be like a white person, it's one of them, man. They damsel like them. They want to live in a world like them. They acquiesce to power structures like them, because look, at the end of the day, they're not challenging the white male power structure. This is the funny thing about all of this. None of this actually challenges white male power structures.
You want to see what the relationship is with white male power structures? This is I put this on Facebook. I think it was last night. I was heading out the door, and this came on, and I said, you know what? Let me get a snapshot of this real quick. This is from. Let's see if I can enlarge this a little bit. This is from the HBO show In Treatment. There you go. Right. This is the idea. Black therapist. The show is based on her. Black therapist, you know, and yeah, an identification with Zaddy. This is where it goes. This is the pinnacle of masculinity as far as what's represented. And yet, if you start to talk about Black men with any other group of women, it's a problem. But somehow, when this happens, either in media or you know, especially if you talk about it with celebrities, it's acceptable. It's applauded. More than acceptable, it's applauded. It's applauded. When you talk about Meghan Markle, you talk about the what's her name? I always get Venus and Serena mixed up. Y'all know who the hell.
Serena Williams.
Serena. You know what I mean? It then becomes a cry for what you call it. It's a success. You know. But that's where the idea is headed. That's where the idea it goes. That this zaddy worship is liberatory. It's
Hey
liberatory.
man, hey look, bro. All I can say is, man, the truth is stranger than fiction, man. And to me, you take a group of men who are subjected to the most cruel treatment, and then you turn around and say, well, he's in collusion with the very people who subjected him to centuries of toil and violent punishment. That, you know, if we lift the people who were subjected to that up, we will reproduce the very same conditions which gave rise to their oppression in the first place. And then they say, well, we're oppressed. We're even more oppressed than you because we're women. And then, you know, black men have to be left scratching their heads like, wait a minute, you mean black men were less oppressed than white women? You mean white women who owned slaves and who managed households? Who, you know, like, I'm like, hold on, wait a minute. And then you got black women who regurgitate these talking points. This is why I think this is intellectual warfare, man.
It is.
I'm just keeping it 100, man. This is like Jacob Carruthers. I don't know if you ever read that book, man.
Hell yeah.
Intellectual warfare.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah, this is what this shit is, bro.
Yeah,
and this is why Bill Burr said, Bill Burr said generals should be studying this shit. Like, how is it possible, man, that a group of women who were as violent and who were as evil and malevolent as their men could all of a sudden claim that they were victims, and now all the emphasis has shifted away from the true targets of the oppression to a group of people who actually benefited from the fucking oppression to begin with.
But this is why, when I called out earlier my problems with certain films like Lovecraft Country series or Tyler Perry's The Family That Prays, they propagate this idea of this feminist Shangri-La, right? We even saw it with what's the Madam C.J. Walker film that came out last year, right? At the end of it all, there's going to be this magical alignment of black women, white women, and LGBTs, and they're going to live, you know, next to the Rockefellers in a mansion and ride off into the sunset. And the missing piece to this that secures their advancement into enlightenment and pure justice is the removal of black males. This is the dynamic. And I'm wondering who the hell else sees this shit. That's the thing that gets me. You know, because when I go to these conferences and I listen to scholars break this stuff down, it's interesting to see how they'll tap dance around black men unless they're supporting the depiction of us as Mr. from Color Purple. We are perpetually Mr. from Color Purple. This is what, when Tommy's talking about black men being considered mimetically white men, he's talking about Mr. from Color Purple, who somehow supersedes slavery in his abuse. Somehow. And that becomes all black men. That's what we're dealing with.
Yeah. But look here, man. Look. Women created communes of their own, man, in the 60s and 70s and shit. You know, they already tried that experiment, bro. And you got to ask yourself, well, why are they not still, if they were such safe places and safe havens, why do they not still exist? Why do they not still, have, I mean, to some degree they have like remnants of these places, like women's battered shelters and shit like that. But these women, man, went to communes and they lived with one another, and then they ended up leaving them, okay? Because there's nothing ideal in nature, bro. Like, even women are assholes. I mean, if you hang around women long enough, you're going to find some women that are assholes and that are violent, vindictive, and manipulative, bro. This is just how nature is. It is what it is. I mean, aren't some of the highest DV rates among lesbian women?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So, I mean, this idea that you can escape evil by escaping one group of persons has been bullshit from the beginning. But, you know, this is strange, though, man. And the good thing about it is, is that there are people who are willing to say something about it, even though there are not enough people stepping forward and saying as much as they could about it. I just, all I know is African American studies is not what it was when it first started. It started off as Black Power, and you had a lot of brothers like there are no Molefe Kete Asantes in African American studies programs anymore. Man, they just they like, okay, Afrocentrism? Oh, hell no.
Well,
you might have some people doing that, but I mean, it's got to be few and far in between, bro.
It's that the common practice now is the deference to feminism. That's the thing, right? You have to demonstrate it. You got to kiss the ring, or else even a burgeoning career for a grad student is considered irrelevant. You know what I mean? This is what we're at. The power dynamic of it and its impact on just which ideas you can discuss. I mean, this is kind of the issue that I'm seeing now, right? And you got young males going through graduate school that basically have to pretend, or at least completely eliminate any possibility of seriously studying Black male issues on a realistic front. They have to do so filtering it through feminist theory, and it's a problem.
And that's the power of education, though. It shapes minds, and it shapes practices, and it shapes habits, and these are the practices and the habits that these groups want. And just think who benefits from this the most. White men and women benefit from this shit the most. Because you create the conditions in which you can continue to pathologize Black men, which they've been doing from day one. This is what you get to do with this. You get to continuously pathologize Black men. And it's unfortunate, man, that you got a group of educated Black women who are doing the handiwork of white supremacy. It's what it is to me. I just hate to say that, man. I hate to say that hopefully it's unwittingly, but I'm beginning to think it's not unwittingly now. It's just like, fuck it. I'll step over your corpse, your dead body. I'll step over your incarcerated body in order to get to my job and my house in the Hamptons or some shit, or my beachfront property. I'll use whatever it is that I got to get what I want. And if I can use this Black female body in order to get more and more, extract more and more resources by guilting and shaming other groups of persons, even my own group, I'll do it. And that's unfortunate, bro, because they already know what's going on. People aren't stupid, man. Even Bell Hooks knows, like, these people know what's going on, right? But some of the first people that'll come out and try to prevent initiatives for Black men from emerging, or white women and white men. They'll be like, just look at the legal scholars and how they'll come out and say, oh, well, we know Black men need something, but this overlooks girls and it creates problems related to sexism and preferential treatment for males. Like, dude, how much more of this shit do we have to hear? Like, we have to hear this nonsense, man, incessantly, and nobody wants to say anything about it. I mean, the first thing they do is they step up and they condemn, black men for this shit. Like, dude, if Black women were going through what Black men went through, there'll be some sort of fucking foreign aid for them, man. They have parachutes coming out of the sky with goodies and all kind of, they have tents and shit and boxes and all kind of shit for them, bro. If any group of people were going through this, man, we need asylum somewhere, bro. That's how I feel.
Damn.
Black men need asylum somewhere.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I mean, like, the most homeless, the most incarcerated, the most the lowest literacy rates die earlier than everybody else. The least wealthy. It's like, how far you want to go with the list? Like, I'm not saying this because I'm trying to make excuses for Black men to be average or anything like this. I'm just saying, damn, dude, this is what we're undergoing, bro.
Yeah,
and nobody gives a shit.
Any other group would be requesting asylum and would likely get it. You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right.
Which country you think we should go to? Because this shit right here, man, I'm ready to vacate the premises, man. This shit right here, you can't even. It's a cool place to live, but golly, man, I'm like KRS-One, man.
You got brothers putting cities and countries in the chat, man.
Man, I'm like, where can we go, bro? Like Vancouver, you don't want to go there. It's even a worse feminist haven in this place. You know what I'm saying? But yeah, man, I don't know, man. This place, man, the narratives and the framing is destroying us, and it's creating wars amongst us that have no basis in anything real.
Yeah.
And this is the most fucked up part about it. And that's why I showed the Negro women article, man, how, in 1918, black women were like, I don't want to go work for white folks anymore. My husband makes enough money to maintain the household. We're good over here. I'm good. So they told the the black women, look, we're about to create an ordinance that's going to make your ass go to work. Okay? You're about to go to work because Miss Ann, the white Becky and Karen need somebody to help them with the laundry and the cooking in the house. And basically they don't like Becky's cooking. They don't like the way she keeps the house clean. We can get that nigger girl over here. She'll clean it up real nice and cook some real good chicken too. Then you get to pop her off, somewhere probably, behind the closed doors or something like that. He got a little concubine right there. And it works out for everybody, man. I hate to say that, man. Like, we got to start telling the truth about this shit, bro.
Oh, my goodness.
But we don't tell the truth about it, bro. So they made these women go to work.
Right.
And nowadays, these women want to go to work. They want to vehemently demonstrate their agency by means of competing with men with work. And not to, I'm not saying that women don't, have a right to work or shouldn't work or have their own money or whatever. That's not the claim I'm making. But what the claim I am making is, how could it possibly be that, black women who've always worked and who eventually, got into a position where they didn't have to work because they had men who were actually able to compete with white men. White folks were like, I don't care if your husband making a lot of money or not, your black ass still coming to work because we need somebody to cook our meals and to wash our clothes, and Miss Ann ain't got to do that. Okay, you got to do that.
Right.
Now they want to do. Now they are running to go work for white folks. Why y'all running to go work for white folks? Why? And then you're competing with men to do it. This is what the academy is about. This is what feminism is about. Let's not get it twisted. It's about jobs, resources.
Yep. Absolutely. And I'm glad you put it that way, because that's what I said earlier in terms of there being kind of a silent war that's been waged on black men that we are not prepared for. We hadn't thought about, but alongside that silent war, this is a ploy for power. It is a push for power at the expense of black males and at the expense of the family, and really in many ways, the social dynamic is falling apart and nobody cares. But black men are really unprepared for it. Walking into these spaces is like walking into a wood chipper, and we keep doing it. And we're not ready for the outcome of it. And if you're talking about the upliftment of the black community, 9 times out of 10, you are the least prepared for the ways in which feminism uses chivalry against you. We are not prepared. It's not part of our dynamic to expect gender to be weaponized against us in that way. And at least every 2 weeks, I run into a brother who lets me know he can't figure out what's going on, why it happened, what's happening. And I have to explain the same thing over and over again. Gender has been weaponized against your chivalry, and you've not been taught to see it that way. That's
Dude,
that's usually what it comes down to.
man, if see, this is the thing that this is the thing that frustrates me about these guys, right? It's especially the guys who read the Black Nationalist in the Academy. Come on, bro. All you got to do is read the Combahee River Collective Statement. That's all you got to do. And they'll tell you they rejected nationalism. They rejected it. They said, oh, no, we don't want this. We don't want this because, right, it's going to be oppressive to women. They don't want that, man. So, okay, if you don't want this, well then, okay.
You know what
What
that
now?
became? You know what that became? BF1.
Black woman first.
Yeah. Black
I mean,
female.
they tell you, bruh, if they sit here and tell you, if they say, look, we are cutting off away from black men and we're looking after our interests first. If they tell you that shit, they mean it, bro.
Yeah,
they got a Bible, man.
They mean it. They mean it most when they don't say it at all. But yes, you're absolutely right.
Man, they already put this shit in the book, man, and let you know where we are with this, bro. They say they want to be progressive with black men, but they really don't. They don't, man. Because they say they want to have solidarity around the fact of race, but they don't, man. So they're creating the BF1. They're creating that, man. Black feminists first, black women first.
Yeah.
Like, fuck my daddy, fuck my son, fuck my brothers. Whatever random black woman that exists, her first before them. Like, really?
And then from there, women first.
Man, that's crazy, bro. Hey, look, it is what it is. But but the black nationalists don't believe it. They don't believe it.
Yeah. I mean, we're not prepared for it. You know, a lot of this has been socialized so deeply. You have people who operate along these lines that we're talking about and don't even really know it. That's the deepest part of it. You know what I mean? That's what I was saying earlier when I talked about the impact of Oprah. You're talking about people who don't even know what feminism is, and yet they have the rhetoric, they have the worldview. This is kind of what I'm saying. It's been socialized into the fabric of our worldview through media, through formal education, through a number of these different streams. And it's rewarded and incentivized materially, from policy to grants to philanthropy. So you got people that believe that they're doing one thing in certain instances, and they're still supporting this narrative that ultimately alienates and underdevelops black males, and they don't know it. But then you also have a population that are very aware of it and don't care.
And that's the problem. That's the issue. You know, like some of these women know that black men are getting the short end of the stick and just don't give a damn. It makes them money. Everybody's cool with it. And let's just keep doing it. Because it's money in denouncing black men. It's just money. It's bread there.
Yeah.
It's always been.
Go ahead.
There's money in making a black man look like a coon, a step and fetch it, or to have his body in a corpse. It's money in that.
Mm-hmm.
It's money in making a black man a demon. That's why rap band sells like it does. You get some whole bunch of black men that's doing like ignorant shit. Everybody loves it.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody buys into it. If you see a black man with a gun in his hand with some do-rags on or something like that, it sells. You know, with tattoos and shit like that, or with
definitely
dreadlocks or gold teeth and shit, that's gonna sell, man.
Every blue moon, I'll have one of these women reach out to me. And you know what usually spawns it?
What that is?
When they have sons. And when they have sons, and not as soon as those sons are born. When those sons are at the precipice of fully experiencing black male life in a negative sense, that's when I'll hear. That's when I'll hear from them. At most. Oh, yeah. At most. But that's what it takes. It actually takes someone in their own nest, in their own household, and maybe then, but short of that. But any last thoughts? Anything you want to put across on this? And I appreciate you coming in, man, especially after doing your own show. Y'all check out the Green Gorilla channel. Check out the show he just did just before this one if you haven't had a chance to check it out. But any last thoughts you want to lay out on this, brother?
Man, African American studies ain't what it used to be. It's a whole bunch of anti-black misandry shit now. Avoid it.
Well,
I hate to say that, bro. Look, I hate to say it. Avoid that stuff, man. Avoid it.
Well, I would say this. Unless you find academic scholars at your location that you can work with. Because trust me when I tell you, if you have a Gigi as your committee chair, or you know what I mean, or if he's on your thesis or whatever, that's going to be an entirely different experience. You know what I mean?
Oh, for sure, for sure. But here's the thing, bro. I'm sorry to interject with you, bro. But look, man, I'm fortunate, man. Nobody, outside of academia, attacked me while I was doing my job, and I'm pretty vocal. You know me, I really don't bite my tongue very much. You know what I'm saying? So, if I feel like somebody's saying something wrong about black men, I'll say that sounds like some bullshit to me. I'll tell them, you catch my drift. But I let everybody speak, man. Black lesbians, black boys, black women, girls, whatever. I let everybody have their view put out there on the table. We deserve the same treatment, man. Don't restrict our voices because it makes you feel uncomfortable. A lot of these people feel uncomfortable because they know they're doing some fucked up shit. They know this is about money and resources at our expense, and they know we're getting the shit end of the deal. They know this, bro. They are aware of this, man. There's too much data out here. They see our lives, man, in real time. These people know what the fuck we're going through. They just don't care, bro. A lot of these people. So if they don't care about us, we have to start taking and adopting the position that we don't care either. I'm sorry, man, but I hate to tell the black nationalists that, but your nationalism ain't gonna add up to much without a family, because that's the cornerstone of the nation.
Well, hey, man, thank you for coming through. Thank you for dropping it. Much appreciated. You have a good night, good brother. I will talk to you soon. All right.
All right, man. Peace.
All right, man. Peace. Look, y'all, this is why I was talking about BM1. You approach me with any idea that's supposed to be about uplifting, particularly the, black folk, that's what I filter it through. I don't care if it's nationalism, Pan-Africanism, ADOS. I filter it through. My first question is, where does this leave black men? Where are black men in the framework? That's how I encounter much of the material that runs across my desk. That's the first question I ask. And that's why I do Black Masculinist Daily News. Because for me, that's the question I'm trying to answer. How does this impact black men? Where do black men fit in this analysis? So I hope that helps. I hope some of you got something out of this. I really appreciate you taking the time to listen, support the channel, share the video, have discussions about it, and feel free to join into the comments and let us know what else needs to be said. All right. Y'all have a good one. It's much appreciated. Have a good night. Talk to you soon. I am here to tell you, brothers, we are not criminals by birth, perennial rapists, incapable intellects, man-children, sperm donors, child support well springs, success objects, walking phalluses, ATM machines, lottery tickets, unintelligent henchmen, valueless assassins, pro bono mercenaries, unpaid bodyguards, interchangeable stepfathers, child discipline proxies, unpaid repairmen, workhorses, emotional tampons, or any other socially accepted dehumanizing stereotype. We are thinkers, inventors, innovators, leaders, fathers, and men. Embrace your humanity, know your worth, and extend your time, attention, and resources only to those who genuinely respect you. And remember, your worth is not defined by meeting other people's narcissistic and selfish and unrealistic needs. You define your worth. Peace.